Hi, my name is Natalia. Yeah, I am just here with a cup of coffee this morning to talk to you about books.
I'm Bethany. I am also here to talk about books.
And I am Laura, and I am talking about books, and I'll probably go off topic, so there we go.
That's the plan for today. Well, actually, dear listener, if you're actually listening to this episode, it means it worked out and we did record it and we did not go off script too much and we cut it and we put it out there. So, yay. If not, you know, like it's like one of those, well, if you're listening to this...
I'm dead.
I'm dead.
But state secrets on this podcast.
But still wait for the next episode. Right. So we're here to talk about books, but I feel like the bigger topic for today is not just books per se, but making book history.
Making book history. What do we want to talk about with making book history? Do we want to talk about how Margaret Atwood was mansplained by a guy about her own book when she posted this cartoon, political cartoon. Do you want to describe it, Bethany?
Sure. This was posted kind of during the election coverage. It's a cartoon of women wearing what's really recognizable as handmaid garb from The Handmaid's Tale, going into a voting booth and coming out of the voting booth wearing regular clothing. And then, as a quote tweet, some other random person decided to explain that the author of that book, unspecified, used Islam, not Christianity, as a model for her imaginary world. This is obviously true, as it resembles Islamic culture and law, and not Christian. It's amazing. How is this person out there on the internet speaking directly to Margaret Atwood about the author of that book, as if she is not the author of that book?
It's so fun.
That is amazing.
Anyway, so, you know, I hope that we can bring up these little things, that this is something in book history. When you think about authorship, you think about owning authorship, you think about how people read and react to things that are written. This is a good example of that, I think, if a funny one. It also brings out cultural mansplainer kind of thing, because I think the person is identified as male somehow. But hopefully we'll bring up these little making book history facts off and on throughout the podcast.
Well, to be honest, at some point I feel like I wouldn't mind actually running out of this kind of content, you know, like on a big scale of things, like
To not have things to say about mansplaining crap.
And books.
I mean, this comic is actually completely illustrative of something that I saw in like an academic study. Somebody actually went through and studied reviews of Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale in Canadian newspapers over time for like years. And male reviewers of her work were completely notorious for misrepresenting feminism in her work.
well, that's just Roland Barthes waving at us from far and far away in history, explaining to us how the author is dead.
Yes.
And I like how we start with this. So, if you're listening to this, we're dead, the author's dead.
I feel like we should at this point say we're not only book lovers and book readers, we're also academics who work in book studies.
Yes.
We know way too much about this crap.
Yeah, so we do have some sort of credibility to wave in the public space at that. Absolutely. Unfortunately for opponents or commenters like these. That was a comment on X, right?
Yes.
I'm not
I
surprised.
still call it Twitter.
I still call it.
Yeah, I feel like we all like lived in the world where Pluto was a nice planet, you know, and
Pluto is still the nice
yes,
planet.
thank you for saying that. I refuse to live in the world where this is like, oh no, we only have 8 planets. Look how that's boring. So yeah, no, and to access Twitter. So
Yes.
I was trying to be more like, you know, like more modern and like sound approachable for the younger audience.
I think it's fairly clear by now, though, that we are a collection of Gen X and millennials here.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's gonna be a fun ride. for us at least. I mean,
Yeah.
we enjoying the process. Yeah, but today we also have another big topic to look at, something that I feel like is a good kick-off point for the birthing of this podcast. Also, I am known for trying to be funny while not being funny, so bear with me.
We promise to laugh.
Yes. we're
Thank
all
you,
funny.
thank you. I will cut in some crickets if necessary, though. So, I guess it is fair to also mention that we all reside in Germany, and we had a chance to go to Frankfurt and participate in Frankfurt Book Fair, which is probably the largest book-related, publishing industry-related event in the West. See, immediately we start with that.
Can you tell we also study post-colonialism?
Frankfurt, what did it bring us? We would like to discuss some highlights. Of course, that is one of those monster events where you just cannot see and hear everything. We were trying to get as much as we could, and I think we brought some nuggets of information that we'd like to share with you. Book-related, publishing-related, and yeah, stay tuned. What was the biggest topic, or one of the biggest topics, maybe?
So I attended a panel regarding AI and copyright. The panel was mostly representatives of academic publishing institutions, and for the most part, these were very scientifically oriented publishing institutions. They also had a representative from Wiley, who is an academic publisher who's famously now kind of licensing their work for AI training. They also had a copyright lawyer on that panel. And there were pretty high tensions, I thought, on that panel. But they were very, very good at being respectful and civil with each other, which was nice because I know this topic is really, really divisive. And most of the conversation I've seen about it up till now has taken place on the internet, which, you know, social media is not a place known for its being respectful of others kind of conversation. So it was nice to see people who not only know what they're talking about, but can temper their talking points. I think there were multiple panels about AI in different kind of scenarios, but this was the one that I was really interested in because all of these publishers were there to talk about what rights they have when it comes to having their work used for AI training models, and how academic and scientific publishers have a sort of responsibility, ethically speaking, to control and set up guidelines for how AI models are trained on their data. One of the big talking points had to do with making sure that AI models will incorporate new data as it becomes available. Not only do they need to be trained frequently on new research, they also need to account for the fact that there can be retractions and corrections of scientific data. And one of the other main talking points that they had was trying to figure out a way, as they move forward with trying to license their work, how AI generative results that are being fed to an end user can maybe rank answers based on where they got that information from. Mm-hmm. If you ask a scientific question to a generative AI model, is it telling you that this is good data that came from Wiley's database versus it's something they picked up from some guy on Reddit? Mm-hmm. Like, that's something that they were really, really clear about on the panel, that everyone agreed with was just about making sure that an end user is being taken care of in that way and being given the information that they need to have about the sourcing of their data. There was also a lot of discussion about some of the unethical choices that AI training models have made up till now, and that a lot of the data that they currently work with is basically stolen. Mm-hmm. That copyright does exist, and that there will need to be punitive measures taken in as they move forward with understanding the legality of AI training, but that cannot stop them from moving forward with working on licensing for AI training now, because AI is already a fact. It can't be put back in the box, and they need to kind of take it as a given that their work will be used for AI training, and that the only way forward is to ensure control of how that training works. And I thought this panel was really reasonable in its approach, in this kind of general agreement that everybody had that they can't stop it from happening, but they can maybe exert some control over having it happen ethically.
Well, I feel like maybe our listeners would agree with me. I feel like that's actually something they need to be very loud about, because my initial reception of this news was, well, look at you. Like, authors benefiting from academic writing in general is a separate issue. Not always the case. A lot of academic work is just being published for the sake of academic work, right? Not so much for the sake of actually supporting the writer, and just being so, straightforward about deciding what happens to that knowledge, to that information, to that work, hours and hours of work that people put into their research, seem to be kind of radical and kind of unethical, at first, in a way. But now knowing that, having this perspective, I feel like, okay, that actually gives me a different perspective, makes me rethink a couple of things about that.
Well, I think there's a lot of things that I'm glad to hear. I was in an online lecture a few weeks ago, which was centered around AI, and someone from Springer Nature was talking about their big concern is, okay, if you're reading something that's literature or whatever, if there's an AI hallucination, it's not going to hurt anybody. But in scientific texts, this is a real concern. So apparently Springer Nature is actually working on a program or something, a way to make sure that scientific data that gets used and is somehow filtered through an AI system, that comes out through an AI system, is correct, isn't going to kill people if it comes out this way. And I mean, these are real concerns when you think about a hallucination in a study or something that's medical related, then that can be very dangerous. So I'm glad to see and hear that there's people in the industry that are focused on how do we do this fairly to authors, how do we do this safely for what the information is, and how do we deal with it. But I think AI was a very, to me, my perception at the book fair, it's a very divided topic. It's either people were 100% gung-ho or people were 100% no, let's not use this. And that was my perception of what people in the audience and on panels were saying at the book fair about AI.
One thing that this panel that I attended was really repeating over and over was the need for transparency when it comes to AI usage, that authors need to be transparent about when they've used AI in their work, when they're submitting it for publication, that the publishing companies need to be transparent to the authors about what the plan is for their work to be used in AI training, that the AI training models and the generative AI companies need to be transparent about where their data is coming from, transparency all around. And one of the things that was said on this panel that Laura just basically said as well is machines can't take liability for false data. Only humans can do that. So there is no way to set up a system where AI replaces the human touch in scientific research and scientific publication. They have to be working in tandem. And I was actually looking at Wiley's website at their AI policies earlier today, and that's basically what they said about their approach to using AI and licensing their publications for AI is there still needs to be a human checking this stuff before it goes out to the world.
Oof, that's a big topic. Maybe that is not the last time we're mentioning this in our podcast. I hope so, because honestly, there is so much more to be said for that. So AI was quite a big deal. A lot of panels were happening on this topic. I did not go to a single one of those, mainly because to get from one hall to another hall of the fair buildings takes you like up to 30 minutes. What I chose is to focus more on audiobook market. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks myself, and I was really curious to see because equally to AI, there's been a lot of panels talking about audiobooks. Some of them were more informative, some of them were less informative, but overall, I guess I'm going to be real concise here. Audiobooks as the future. In a way, audiobooks market, it keeps growing. Has been growing for the last 2-3 years, according to the statistics presented at the fair by different agencies. And the leaders in general digital consumption of books and audiobooks as well is the Nordic countries. Also, the Nordic countries had a very interesting section in one of the halls where, there was like this, like all the Nordics together, and we ended up accidentally in the middle of them celebrating. And then I've heard the rumor that every evening there's been an active celebration of sorts, lots of drinks and lots of, I guess, book exchange. I did actually buy a bag as a sort of memento from a lady, an artist from Finland, and it says books and shit. I was like, I have to have it. Also, I did buy a lot of books. I needed a bag to carry that.
The real question is, why didn't you buy us books and shit bags?
To be honest, they were €15, and I'm like, that's a canvas bag, and I'm like, oof. That was a bit like, oof. So audiobooks, exciting growing market, and hopefully we'll get back to that because I would love to talk a bit more about the production of audiobooks and so on. Exciting. What else was a big deal, Laura?
Well, actually, to go on the point of audiobooks, I myself am curious about what it is that's driving the audiobook push in, like, especially I think Denmark. In 2 data or statistics things we went to showed Denmark high on online books, audiobooks, and it's interesting to me just to, as a part of book history, when you look at readers, what's causing this? What's driving this? So.
Online books or even ebooks, right?
Yeah.
And I think they also mentioned like newspapers in digital format. So it's basically like just literally all the textual consumption in online format. Yeah. Or like digital format.
And to me, because I made an argument at a SHARP conference, and SHARP is the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading, and Publishing, which is a nice book studies, a great organization that I'm a part of, and I think, their conferences are super interesting. I was on a panel, reality TV and the book, and what I ended up focusing on is a shift in how reality TV has a little bit of an oral literature presentation, and I just wonder if this is where we're going with listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks, that we're going back to a more shared experience, oral culture. So that's just one thing I'm throwing out there. It's a theory. I don't have anything to back that up, but I find it interesting that we do seem to be going back to this more shared reading experiences, especially with like silent book clubs, silent reading experiences, and then more listening to things that we're all listening to and not reading privately to ourselves.
So we wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the statistics we saw, I think, at the fair. Laura had a panel she went to that had some really interesting reading data and market data. The only thing we can do about it is speculate, but I think some of the figures are really interesting, and I'd love to hear 1 or 2 of them.
Well, I think generally, so the big thing, and this is apparently the first day of the fair every year, that the Federation of European Publishers releases the data from the year before on the book industry, how much money is being made, how the industry is doing. And one thing they pointed out was that kind of in Europe, the book industry is back up to before the financial crisis. So we're talking, it was at a level in 2007 and it went down, and then now it's back up to that level as far as net turnover. But if you look at inflation, And the nominal figures, there's a straight line down. You could just slide all the way into hell on that line as far as how much money is being made in Europe in the book market. And I think an interesting thing about that is that the book market has not adjusted for inflation at the same rate that other products and services have. So I think that's one reason for the explanation of the disparity between the real and the nominal figures on this. So that's, one thing I've noted.
Again, this is pure speculation, but I imagine that the book industry can't adjust for inflation at the rate of other consumer goods because other consumer goods are going to be more, let's call it necessary. Like you have to buy milk and bread. You don't have to buy books. So if the price point goes above a normal person's salary, they're going to just stop buying books. So I think there's a real possibility that the industry is looking at making less money on books is better than making no money on books.
Well, I mean, as long as we don't end up going back to a way where only a few people can buy books like it was in the 1700s and 1800s, early 1800s, then we're good. But I think that was an interesting statistic. And again, going back to statistics about what's being purchased as regards to online books, e-books versus print books, but online purchases of print books are still much, much higher in most European countries, except for online purchases of ebooks. Online magazines are higher in Denmark and Finland than any other country, and they're higher than the print books. So I think this is an interesting statistic to look at how these figures change in each country.
I'm just looking at the chart myself and trying to read it upside down, which is never a good idea. And yes, I was just wondering, we see again Denmark and Finland with their online purchases of ebooks, online magazines, and newspapers as just skyrocketing in comparison to printed books, magazines, or newspapers purchased online. That's quite a stark difference, right? Fascinating. Where do you get your literature, by the way?
Do you mean, do I buy it online?
Yes.
I do a lot of my book shopping at the German chain called Thalia. I do buy books in store sometimes, and if they don't have what I'm looking for, I'll buy it online. I'm pretty anti-Amazon, so I only use them as a very last resort, and usually only if it's something that I need for academic work. I try not to buy anything for my own personal pleasure off of Amazon, and will just not buy a book if I can't get it from Thalia or a more local indie place. I really wish that bookshop.org had a German chapter. That would be amazing. Someday.
Just a hint, bookshop.org. I hope you are one of our first listeners. You hear this message.
Okay, well, I have to admit my shame. I use Amazon. I'm sorry. I really don't want to. I really don't want to. But I started with Amazon a long, long time ago. When they first opened, it's where I got my books. I was so happy to have a place like this to get books from, because our bookstores were not the greatest. Even in Nashville, they weren't the greatest. We had a couple of good ones, but...
And Patchett, you did not hear that.
Okay,
She's
yes.
obviously also one of our first listeners.
Of course. Why not? Why wouldn't she be? We're so intelligent, and she'll hear Nashville and be like, "Oh, I need to listen to..." Anyway. No, I mean, we did, her bookstore was a good bookstore, but either way, it was nice to be lazy and order stuff at home. So I do use Amazon also because my husband and I like to read the same book. So it's easier if we're reading it at the same time to have it on an ebook, and then we can both look at it and read it together. But yeah, I admit. But I do try to go to one of the local bookstores here, and especially when I need to order something special that's in English. It takes a while, but, I like to support them. And I will go to Talia as well if I want to go. But I did buy books at the book fair, so.
Oh yeah,
We all did.
we gave back to the community in a way. So I have to say I do all of the above, Amazon and Talia, but to be honest, majority of the books I get are from birthday presents. And how do they come to my friends and end up on my bookshelf? I don't know, to be honest. A lot of those are used. I have a lot of friends who prefer to buy used books online or in person in different secondhand stores. And yeah, so that's for the sake of, environment. But also quite a large chunk of my reading now comes from an audiobook app. No advertising intended here because we're in Germany. Rules are strict, so I'm obligated to actually say this is keine Werbung, just in case. I'm not sure if actually that applies to podcasts, but we'll talk about this in some other future episode because that's a fascinating topic as to advertising on social media and so on. The audiobook app I'm using is called Everend, and a majority of books I listen to there. And what I find interesting, it is a subscription model, which is an ideal solution for people who read a lot, who, read multiple books simultaneously, where, for example, Audible doesn't really work well for me because you usually, in the subscription mode, you can only have one book at a time. Most of the time you can get some free stuff, but then again, it's not always, you're not always free to choose what you want to read now. You just have to choose what's on offer. So subscription models was also mentioned quite a lot in one of those presentations on statistics, I believe done by BookBeats, which is, again, kind of Werbung, is a Swedish/European platform for audiobooks, a subscription-based app that showed immense growth in the last 2 to 3 years, I believe was the statistics. So people are more interested in listening to audiobooks in local languages and in English. So that was very interesting to see the statistics that a lot of people are not only listening to audiobooks in their local language on this app, but also quite a big chunk comes in English, right? And yeah, the market is growing. It's very popular.
Well, I think another thing to bring up about audiobooks that was mentioned when they were doing the main statistics at the book fair is that it's because of these subscription models, it's harder to track necessarily. You can't say this many books were purchased, this many audiobooks. They said even in their data, they're losing track of the rise of audiobooks. So I think it becomes a little more complicated when it's in a subscription model that way to really know numbers and this kind of thing, especially if people are listening to multiple things and listen half to something, whatever. So I think it makes data a little more complicated.
Let's try to structure our experiences. As we've mentioned before, it was just so much going on at the same time, but we are going to try to, be precise. Laura, what is your favorite event?
My favorite event was How to Be a Business Punk in Publishing, which was presented by Felix Zeltner, who is the founder of Remote Daily, a virtual experiences company. And the guests were Jennifer Kim of Norongi Books. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right. It's a multilingual bookstore on Granville Island in Canada. And the other guest was Chris Klang of Klein Canteen Audiobooks in Darmstadt. And it was a very open and honest discussion of what it is to be in the publishing industry, what it is to deal with books, to deal with all the ins and outs of running such businesses, and just no BS. This is how it is. And I really appreciated that.
I feel like I can also kind of be honest about this and share my experience with that. I also found this event exciting. And maybe what also made it extra exciting was the fact that prior to that, I had been to a presentation talk sort of with representatives of audiobook departments, basically at Random House and Penguin Random House and Audible, I believe, was the second person. And to be honest, that was the 45 minutes that could have been spent elsewhere. I expected something a bit more insightful from that presentation, and it was basically like pure vibes. And I love vibes, but the whole Frankfurt Book Fair is about vibes. I don't really need more when there is so many interesting things being discussed. So after that, going straight to the event of or on punk projects and publishing, I felt like more like, okay, that was actually useful. Like, we've got context, we networked, we've actually heard interesting perspectives of people doing something that I kind of guess I can say we're trying to do here. Being very punk. Bethany, what was your most interesting event?
I also actually really liked the business punk and publishing thing, but I will bring up one of the more impressive events that I went to, which was the panel called Storytelling is a Human Right that was being put on by a UN organization. They had brought some authors to speak about storytelling as kind of a method of agency for them. A couple of them were completely banned from their home countries, and a couple more had a history of genocide in their family. And the panel was really letting them speak about how painful that truth is and how important it is to be able to tell your story when truth is getting covered up by these like powers that be. I actually think one of the guests that I was most glad that they included was an author who is Italian and uses her work to really call out Italy and Western Europe for their role in fascism in other parts of the world.
Just a quick side note, Italy was the guest of honor in 2024 at the book fair.
That is true. And I unfortunately didn't have time to go to any of the panels that were being put on in the, guest of honor hall. But I did go in there at one point. It was just such a wonderful display. And I really had been looking forward to a couple of the panels that they were doing. I just got too busy to go to them.
And they also had quite a lot going on. I'm not sure if that's the case every year when the guest of honor provides that many different talks. And I walked around for a bit, and I found the stage was not too large in itself, but that was basically, I think, 3 or 4 stages, separated just by several walls, and people could get headphones to listen to translations directly. While listening to music, there was live music, there were a lot of presentations on all possible topics. I found it quite cute also that they brought a 3D printer as a display of what they can do, and they were making these sort of like bookmark / combs, so you can use it as both. I found that like very cute because they talked a lot about ecology as well, so it was interesting to see. So what did I find super exciting? The favorite event, or one of the favorite events, because it's really hard to choose one, was 30-minute presentation on book covers. Unfortunately, I missed some of it, but I did quite enjoy looking at what changed in cover styles and designs over the last 3 to 5 years. And the examples we were looking at, that's what I loved, that the designer who was presenting, she also brought before and after examples of different covers of different genres. Dark academia, dark romance, thriller, crime fiction, and, cozy crime and some sort of like fluffy romance, and showed like what changes has happened, what kind of fonts we prefer nowadays in these genres, what kind of like overlays, and do we use silhouettes, surprise, silhouettes on book covers are not en vogue anymore, so we're moving on towards either having like actual faces or just symbols, like not silhouettes anymore. Silhouettes is like not fancy, doesn't sell. And the sort of summary of that presentation was that you need to update your book covers at least every 5 years. And I found this kind of interesting because like to say like, okay, we see this tendency of books losing in sales, especially online, within 3 to 5 years, and how covers can actually change that, revamp, basically, lives of books. I found that quite interesting and insightful. And yet again, this is another example that a lot of smaller, I don't know how to say, like individually organized panels and events proved to be way more informative than a lot of bigger ones where people were just like talking about vibes and pretty much, yes. So I found that quite exciting. Well, all these favorite things, nice things is not the only thing that happened. We do, as always, have something to criticize. I was trying to avoid this word, but come on, let's be honest. We are critically thinking about our experiences. And Bethany, what can you criticize?
Let's call it providing opportunities for growth, not criticizing. Yeah, I mean, as you go around at the fair for a couple of days, you do start to pick up on certain trends. And something that I saw was a lack of priority being put on accessibility, especially for like mobility impaired people. The seating arrangements in a lot of areas where talks were being held was really inadequate. Like little stools low to the ground with no backs, no arms, and they're just scattered around really chaotically. So someone who was using any kind of mobility aid couldn't really get into the seating area, would probably struggle with the seat being provided, and wheelchair users would find themselves kind of relegated to the back. And I noticed that even in one of the nicer halls, the pavilion, the seating arrangements there were just completely inaccessible. And I thought, man, you go to all of the trouble as a conference space of making your space accessible with these really wide aisles, bathrooms everywhere, seating places everywhere, elevators and all of these things. And, the halls themselves were made for accessibility, but then somebody just throws a bunch of stools in the middle of the room and kind of ruins that for everybody.
That makes me think of the Penguin Random House Pavilion, where they had this stage with extremely interesting talks and like 30-minute presentations, authors presenting there, being like Q&As, 8 chairs. There were 8 chairs in front of it. I'm like, what is that? What is happening? All right, we probably have a lot of space in the back for people to, walk around. But I felt like 8 chairs with another 30 people standing around, that was not really comfortable. And I can understand this, for example, in comparison to my experience from last year's book fair, where one organization invited Sayaka Murata to do a talk and sign books. There was a signature hour as well, which they planned to be like 15 minutes, and it was more than an hour. And I know that because I was in fact in that line, one of the last people waiting for an hour to get my book signed. They did not expect so many people to show up and show interest. And they did not prepare at all, did not bring enough books, they did not to buy, they did not expect people to form a 1 hour long line. I can get that from a small organization that just wanted to bring an interesting speaker. But Penguin Random House, I don't know, I would expect like a more spatial awareness in preparation. Well, I feel like my point of critique or my recommendation for improvement is also more utilitarian, I guess, because I found it very interesting that there was just one water fountain kind of with drinking water for this huge conference hall. It is an improvement from the year before.
Okay, well, my criticism is really about the scheduling of events and talks, and kind of, I think this also goes with the inaccessibility idea, just the lack of thinking about how long it takes people to get between the halls. I mean, it's quite a huge event through, 5, 6 huge buildings. And getting from one end to the other could easily take 20 minutes or more, depending on how quickly you can move. And a lot of times, I think most events were meant to wrap up 10 minutes before the starting of another event, which still not enough time, but I understand you can't make things, much longer in between. But most people in the days that I was there were taking up to the last minute of their event, and if it was something really interesting, of course you're staying, of course you're listening to the questions and what they're saying, but then you're going to be 10 to 20 minutes late for the next thing you want to do, depending on where it is. And it just made it impossible to do a variety of different things in different halls. You had to start making your schedule where you're in the same hall, because then you had a chance of getting to different things. So I just felt like maybe a little more, if maybe they could... I'm not in this kind of structuring, but it feels like there could be a better way of doing this or organizing this, where people aren't so left to just either leave things early or arrive late. It just seemed, and saw a lot of guests doing that, coming where the talk was close to finish maybe, or getting up 5 minutes after it began, just because, they probably had a long way to go to get to wherever they were trying to go next. So that was my big criticism.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what happened to me and my favorite event of that fair with the book covers. I was 10 minutes late for a 30-minute talk. You can imagine this is quite a loss of content for that time span, exactly because I had to go from hall 3 to hall 6, and that just really takes quite a while to get to these places. So yeah, that is, I honestly, I also kind of don't envy the person who's responsible for time planning and the time slots of the whole event. I also don't envy the people working on the app, because I feel like they're very miserable people, because the app was horrible, and I know a lot of people complained a lot. But this year I did not even manage to register. I could not just, organize my stay there comfortably because of that. And I feel like that is just, the event is so large and so bulky to organize that I don't envy people doing that at the same time as I'm giving out ideas for improvement. However, that is not something we'd like to focus on too much, because there are still plenty of highlights. So my highlight was more emotional. It was more of a fangirl reader experience, because quite accidentally, again, despite the malfunctioning app, but thanks to my more organized friends, I found out that Elif Shafak was doing a book signing, and of course we had to get there. And my friend and I, shout out to Hannah here, we were really focusing in the line to not geek out and not be like, oh my God, I'm a huge fan of your work. And literally the first thing I told to Elif Shafak, a famous and amazing British-Turkish writer, was, I'm a huge fan of your work. We just spent 10 minutes in this line trying to not say that. And literally the first thing I said was this, because I lost it. Actually seeing her in person was so nice. She was so friendly and pleasant. And, when a person is literally, she's like, I know she has to sign tons and tons of books now for random people in a very loud space for an hour. And she still looks right in your eyes. She looks at you. She literally interacts with you. She asks about your name. So, to ensure no mistakes with names happening, you write your name on a paper, on a sticker that you hand in with your book so she could copy it. But still, she's like, oh, hi, where are you from? And I was like, wow, this is amazing. We chatted a little bit. We took pictures with her. And she just radiates so much warmth. And I was like, I could not formulate thoughts. Anyways, Elif Shafak, amazing. She was presenting one of her new books, the German translation of it. The book is called Am Himmel die Flüsse, and that is a German translation of her recent book.
Well, I think my highlight just had to be meeting so many friendly, enthusiastic booksellers, publishers, fellow readers. People were really surprisingly open to discussion, supportive. There was a European Union agency there. I think Creative Arts Europe is what they're called. And they were just super supportive about people starting new projects and any kind of thing having to do with books or publishing or just getting voices heard. And that was really surprising to me, because I guess you always have this idea that such industries are full of kind of people who aren't going to give someone who's a nobody, essentially, the time of day. But that really wasn't my experience at all. So I was very pleased with that. And I have to give a shout out to Ylva Verlag. Just had a nice conversation with them. They had a lot of really beautiful special edition book fair books on sale. They had just these fun surprise packages you could buy, and I bought a couple, and I'm looking forward to reading these books. And they were just really nice people to talk to.
My highlight is a little small and a little silly, but there was this booth in one of the halls, I think Hall 3, where they were selling postcards and calendars and things covered in children's artwork. And they all were drawn from books that children had written themselves and illustrated by themselves. And these books were like actually bound and sold like that. And it was just the cutest thing I'd ever seen in my life. All of these like misspelled words and just adorable and sometimes terrifying artwork. It was just really so nice to see somebody who's like promoting that kind of independent thinking and literacy in kids of that age.
Yeah, because in the end, that's what literature, books, stories is all about.
I think I have to share this one picture with you all because I found it funny. If you look at how it's a picture of a sign in front of the book fair hall 1, and it shows what's in this building. And so it says Frankfurt Author Stage from Wednesday to Friday, New Adult Stage from Friday to Sunday. So I think that just shows, like, you know, something specific, how New Adult has its thing, that once it's the public-facing days, we're not about authors anymore. We're New Adult, one and only. This is where the industry is going, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you, dear listener, for staying with us that long. I hope you enjoyed our small memory trip into Frankfurt Book Fair world, and stay tuned. We're going to be back with more cool stuff.
And that is a threat.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Thank you guys for joining us today, and
Read more books.
read more books.
Read more books.